Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very empowering show coming right up with special guest, palmer-kippola, and she's here today to share with us her new book, Beat-autoimmune, the 6 keys to reverse your condition and reclaim your health. Now, Palmer is a functional medicine certified health coach who reversed her MS by removing her inflammatory root causes and healing her gut. She has created a framework for healing and preventing autoimmune conditions called FIGHTS, which represent the root cause categories we control: food, infection, gut health, hormone balance, toxins, and stress. So let's welcome to the show, palmer-kippola.
It's a delight to be with you, Marianne. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh my goodness, what an honor it is to spend this time with you and talk about your new book. When I got this, I was so excited because this is something that a lot of people, they have questions about. It's like, what is autoimmune?
You're absolutely right. And I have to put it in perspective. You hear about cancer quite a bit because you hear lung cancer, skin cancer, pancreatic cancer, breast cancer, but nobody ever says MS autoimmune, lupus autoimmune, Hashimoto's autoimmune. So it seems like all of these are diseases that are frankly different. And so we don't get the level of recognition or the attention, frankly. A lot of people don't even know that what they have is an autoimmune disorder.
Wow, that's just so powerful. I'm so glad we're having this discussion. So why don't we share your story? Why don't we start with that? Like, what started you on this path? What made you become interested in researching this?
Well, I need to take you back to when I was 19 years old, because that's when the story starts. I was home for the summer after my freshman year of college, a happy, healthy, well-adjusted 19-year-old girl. And the future looked bright. And I've had a summer job, but one morning I woke up and the soles of my feet were all tingling. And, you know, that feeling that you get when you lay on a limb and then the blood flows back all tingly and so forth. Only this morning, as hard as I shook my feet, the blood just didn't flow back. And so off I went to my job thinking this will just go away. But it didn't. And that tingling just crept up and up my calf. And by the time it reached my knee, I knew something was really wrong. So I called my parents, who called the family doctor, who said, get her to the neurologist at UCLA that afternoon. So that's what we did. And we sat in the neurologist's office. This is 1984. So just for context, this is a while ago. And she had me do a cursory exam, 5 minutes, and with a spectacular lack of sensitivity, pronounced, I'm 99% certain you have multiple sclerosis, MS. Wow. And if I'm right, there's nothing you can do except take medication and prepare for your life in a wheelchair. And I'm sad to report that many times people hear a similar diagnosis even today, but at the time we had never heard of MS. We didn't know what this was, and we left her office with very little information, very little hope. And as I said, this is 84, so there was no internet, no way to go home and do a quick search. And that night, by the time we went to sleep, my mom crawled in bed with me, and she's holding me and crying, and I'm crying harder by this time because all the areas that had been tingling, which had risen up to my collarbone, had gone completely numb, and my body would stay enshrouded in numbness for a full 6 weeks. It was really a terrifying time, but the journey of healing began soon after that initial shock.
And hopefully not too long after firing that initial doctor too.
Well, I don't know if I'm, we tend to believe our doctors and what they tell us. And I was going to say I'm dumb enough to have believed 6 of them over the next 26 years, and that's what I did. So I had a 2.5 decade course of relapsing, remitting MS, believing mostly what the doctors told me, that there was nothing I could do. But I have to add that my dad, who had been a fighter pilot, was extremely encouraging. And he used to motivate me and say, honey, you can beat this thing. I know you can. And I just needed to figure out how to do that. So with my can-do spirit inspired by my dad,
Mm-hmm.
I set about conducting a number of experiments over the years, many of which did not work, including a low-fat vegetarian diet that did not work for me. Taking medication for 4 years, that did not work for me. Stress reduction was a huge, huge help and continues to be. But it wasn't until 2010 when I actually discovered my holy grail, which was in the food category.
And that's so amazing. I'm going to start with your dad. To have a father like that, because back in the 80s, we grew up in the same era and there wasn't really, the internet was just kind of starting, but it didn't have the resources like it does today. And so we look at being able to really kind of carve out the information and really educate yourself is really difficult. But then to have a father who's like, you're going to beat this, you've got this behind you, and really kind of motivating you. How just lucky you are to have had him with you during that time.
Oh my goodness. Both of my parents, they were absolute rocks. My mom was the one who would be very quick to empathize. And we started planning how I could have my future in a wheelchair, which was what was expected at home in Southern California. And so I was getting mixed messages from the medical community, one thing, and from my dad, very much igniting the can-do spirit. And that was kind of the path that I've carved, is what can I take that's the best of Western medicine, plus what can we do from a lifestyle perspective? And was really, really a tough up and down journey, but ultimately very successful.
Well, you've been there and done it when it comes to autoimmune. And so you talk about starting with food. Why do we start there?
Well, this is a great question. It turns out in all of the research that I've done and interviewed dozens of functional and integrative and naturopathic doctors who treat and work with people with autoimmune conditions, they say, and my experience is, the number one place to start is with food, because you can heal 60 to 80% of the way just by addressing the inflammatory foods, or the foods that are causing your own gut to have a reaction. And sometimes it can be up to 100%. So it's the highest leverage category of all of the categories that I've studied. And that's why it's a really good place to start.
Mm. Well, and so when you made the changes in your diet, were there certain things that you immediately eliminated? Was it trial and error? What was it like for you?
Yeah, well, I was fortunate in 2010, after this up and down, relapsing, remitting MS and symptoms ranging from debilitating to just mildly annoying and back. I also had a little bit of tummy trouble after eating. So I'm just giving this as a little bit of context. But I thought everybody did. This wasn't like run to the restroom kind of tummy trouble. It was just a little gurgling after eating, and I just thought it was normal. But by 2010, I had learned enough about nutrition. We had the internet now in full swing, that I must be eating something that was causing this tummy trouble. So I found a functional medicine nutritionist. And functional medicine is, I think many of your listeners may be familiar with, but it's a relatively new type of medicine, scientific, that's all about getting to the root cause of why you got some illness in the first place. So it doesn't just treat surface symptoms. It wants to understand what's causing your immune system to be upset, to be overreacting, as it were, with an autoimmune condition. And so this functional medicine nutritionist ran a number of tests, and it came back that I had non-celiac gluten sensitivity. In other words, I didn't have celiac disease, but I was sensitive to gluten. And gluten is a very inflammatory protein found in almost everything that we eat. Certainly, I was eating it 3 times a day. I would wake up in the morning and have a very large bowl of Cheerios with my non-fat milk and heap loads of sugar. And then I would have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich on whole wheat bread for lunch, so more gluten. And for dinner, it might be pasta and occasionally a beer or pizza, whatever one has. And so my body was getting this steady stream of this inflammatory protein, this molecule that creates a leaky gut in anyone who eats it. We now have that science. So this nutritionist back in 2010 educated me on what gluten was doing to my body, creating this it's called intestinal hyperpermeability. Most people know it as a leaky gut, and inflaming my system and causing the perpetuation of this autoimmune attack, this MS. So she led me through this gut healing protocol where I took out gluten and dairy and soy and corn and caffeine for a while, and things that may cause an inflammatory response in people, the known autoimmune triggers. Even eggs can be known to have a triggering effect. So for 1 month, I eliminated all of those foods. And within 1 week, I stopped having any tummy troubles after eating, which was notable. Like, hey, I don't feel anything. And within 1 month, Marianne, I stopped having any and all MS symptoms ever again, full stop.
Wow. That is just remarkable that something that is in our foods could have such a dramatic impact like that.
Well, it's shocking, actually. And I am really clear when I say to people, because they hear this story and they may think that taking the gluten out and you can reverse debilitating course of lupus and MS and celiac disease, and that sometimes isn't enough. So keep in mind that I had been working on stress reduction actively for 26 years. So going from that always on hyper aroused stress response state to the relaxation mode. So I had been doing that. And I also had other things like chronic infections and whatnot. But have you heard of the concept called the total body burden or the toxin bucket? Is that a familiar term?
It is not, but I'd love for you to expand on that for our listeners.
Yeah, well, you can just visualize that in our bodies, we hold this bucket, and metaphorically speaking, and we have elimination organs that are beautifully designed, and they are designed to clear any toxins that we might bring into our body through food that we eat, maybe toxic metals or environmental chemicals that come our way. And so you can imagine in the bottom of this bucket, there are holes. And one hole might represent your skin, and another is your colon, another is your urine. And that's how we clear these toxins. And in a perfect world, we do a great job. Things come in and we let them go. But in this world that we're living in today, this modern life that we have, where it's just the perfect storm of boatloads of environmental chemicals. I think we've lost count. They used to say 80,000 chemicals in commerce in the United States, more than 1 million in the environment worldwide. We have evidence now of newborns being born and their cord blood shows things like flame retardant and garbage. And this just shouldn't be happening, right? We have girls that are going through puberty so much younger, in part because of what we're spraying on the golf courses that are running into the drinking water supply, that are what are called endocrine disruptors, estrogen mimicking. So our bodies are becoming duped, and we're not clearing these toxins as fast as we used to. So you can imagine that when you're filling the toxin bucket up with those inflammatory factors I call fights for food, infections, gut health, hormone balance, toxins, and stress, they just layer upon layer like sedimentary rock until one day, maybe a big stress, maybe the flu, maybe a shocking event in the family, or even the birth of a child. Those are all very fertile times for the toxin bucket to spill over. And you can think of this as metaphorically again, the advent of the leaky gut has your body just can't handle it anymore. And you begin to feel the expression of autoimmune issues, whether that is profound fatigue, aches and pains, numbness and tingling, and whatever your genetic weak link is. Mine happens to be MS. For somebody else, it could be lupus. It might be rheumatoid arthritis. That's what might start to get expressed.
You know, it's interesting. You talk about these symptoms, and I'm sure our listeners are going, you know, I wake up with that. I can feel that in the morning. I have aches and pains. I feel tired. And so, you know, maybe it's really something to explore in regards to the foods that we're putting in our bodies, because that all makes sense. I mean, we can overload the system so much maybe before something happens.
Absolutely. And it's one of the highest leverage points that we have. So one of the easiest things that people can do, because I like getting to the simplified strategies of what can you do if you're not dealing with a debilitating disorder, sometimes people aren't motivated to do the things to, take the healthy path. But one experiment that you could do that might yield very positive results is just take 30 days and examine what you're eating. And I would advise removing some of the known inflammatory ones, like the gluten, like the cow dairy, like the sugar. Those are really the big three. And if you want to go beyond that, I dig into all of those elements in my book, which I call a 30-day food vacation, because I think it's much more empowering to make it sound like you're taking a vacation from some of your usual foods. And you're going to experiment, with maybe some vegetable oils that are not toxic, like canola oil and other oils that are man-made or chemically modified in some way, just giving your body a break. Mm-hmm. And when you give your body a break from eating these things often grown with pesticides or genetically modified in some way, you'll find some freedom from these pesky symptoms.
It's, I love in your book, you have the Healing Foods Toolkit. And number 2, it's like take the food assessment, number 1. Number 2 is eliminate sad foods. And and it's interesting because when we look at it in that category, it really does break things down. It's like, hey, do I really want to be putting these in my body?
Well, everything matters. And I was thinking about this morning. It's these disorders are unfortunately a combination of the toxins that are entering our body. It's the lifestyle factors, the lack of sleep that we're getting, choosing not to exercise, the food we eat. There's so many factors in this equation that everything matters. And I was thinking in your context that every moment matters. That each decision that we make to take a bite of food or the hour of sleep we get or don't get. We used to believe that our DNA was our destiny, that whatever my mom or dad or grandparents had, well, I was destined to get that too. But it turns out this new field of epigenetics, which is this super empowering biology, shows that it's not our DNA that just expresses itself. I didn't wake up at 19 and have my genes in some sort of pre-programmed kind of way just express themselves like they're on a timer, right? It wasn't that at all. It's that my toxin bucket was filling up slowly but surely with a load of chronic stress that I had growing up. My dad, being the fighter pilot, also had, a darker side that he used to yell a lot and call my mom names, and I became hypervigilant. So I had a lot of that. I was adopted as a baby, a lot, issues with abandonment and those things that slowly fills up the bucket, right? And then you have a sugar addiction. So you get a mouthful of mercury, and mercury is toxic. And there's a practitioner in the UK who said that he saw 4,000 patients with MS, and out of 4,000 patients he saw, only 5 didn't suffer from some level of mercury poisoning. So each of these elements is really consequential. It's not any one thing. If I hadn't been vigilant about reducing my stress, would removing the gluten have made the big deal that it did for me? So it really matters that we have all of this control thanks to epigenetics, and we can determine whether or not those genes get expressed or not. So it turns out, I didn't know this until recently, that our genes represent only about 10% of our health outcomes, but how we live, those fights categories, the food, the infections, the gut health, the hormone balance, the toxins, and the stress, those are 90% of the equation. So that really puts the ball in our court, if it were, right? I mean, we've got way more control than we ever imagined possible, which is scary and very empowering at the same time.
Well, I think you had a lot of people just kind of stop in their tracks when you hear about the correlation between sugar and mercury. I mean, we're looking at that going, I don't think a lot of people, I don't think it's that as widely known as it should be. We'll put it that way, because if there was that connection, people are making that, they'd probably go, I'm going to eat a lot less sugar. Forget this.
Well, as I said, everything matters greatly. And so you can just make a decision It might be to, if you're drinking soda, to maybe swap up the soda instead of, reaching for the sugary drink. And I'm not advocating diet soda because that's neurotoxic with those artificial sweeteners, but maybe you have sparkling water with a spritz of organic cranberry juice, as an example. You just make one healthy swap, and all of that is consequential. It adds up. So deciding to walk today for 20 minutes versus not doing anything at all, or maybe going to bed an hour earlier and getting more restorative sleep. Again, it all adds up. It's not any one thing in isolation. It really is what I call a combo platter.
Well, you touched on something a little bit ago I'd like for you to expand on. You talk about epigenetics. What is that, and how does that impact this?
Oh, man, such super empowering science. If you are not familiar with the book, The Biology of Belief by Dr. Bruce Lipton, that would be a good thing for your listeners to explore. So epigenetics literally means above or on top of the gene. And for years, as I said, people thought your DNA was your destiny. Well, it turns out Bruce Lipton is a biologist who used to teach at the University of Wisconsin, and for years he taught the central dogma that whatever your parents had and grandparents had, etc., that would befall you too, which is really a victim kind of mentality. But luckily, he was also a researcher, so he did a lot of his own research, and he was studying his results. And one of the studies he did, I think, illustrates this beautifully. He took 3 different petri dishes, and in each petri dish, he put the same genetically identical stem cells. So into one petri dish went 30,000 of one stem cell, and the same stem cell in the second dish, and the same in the third. And the only variable in this experiment was the culture medium. So he put a different culture medium into each one. Now, if you are a person who believes that your DNA is your destiny, you would think that you'd go back to these petri dishes and see the exact same cells growing in each one, right? Because your genetic switch goes off and you express the Alzheimer's or the MS or whatever befalls you. And that's not what happened. When Bruce went back to his laboratory, he saw that in one dish, bone cells were growing, and in another dish, fat cells were growing, and the third, muscle cells were growing. So this just blew his mind wide open, and he realized it's not the DNA that's just pre-programmed expressing itself. It's the culture medium. In other words, it's the environment that the cells are bathing in that matters most. So putting that into the context of our bodies, every cell in our body has a cell membrane, and it's constantly picking up signals from the environment, harm or heal, inflame or restore. So those decisions that you make to eat that, standard American diet, that hamburger from McDonald's, I'll pick on McDonald's for a moment. I could pick on a lot of them, but it's meat that's not grown very thoughtfully. And there's a lot of corn syrup in the bun and so forth. So you're giving instructions to your cells to turn on the inflammatory genes with that one decision. On the other hand, if you choose a 100% grass-fed burger that's been cooked over maybe medium-high heat and not charcoal crisp, and you decide to have a organic lettuce leaf as your bun, well, that's going to turn on your nourishing genes and switch off the inflammatory ones. So that's what I mean by the moment-by-moment decisions. You've got the control to turn your genes on and off. That's what epigenetics does. It switches on and off your genes based on how you live your life, which is just incredibly empowering.
Well, we've had Dr. Bruce Lipton on the show. He's amazing. I'm not surprised that you're using his work in your book and resourcing that, because he's come across so many very interesting things that have to do with the human body and really putting things into perspective. In your book, Beat-Autoimmune, you talk about minimizing toxins. How is it possible to do that?
That's a great question, given the assault that we're under. So I mentioned that we have this unlimited supply of chemicals in our environments, and it seems that we are at the victim of whatever's in our air and water supply, but actually we have way more control there too. We just need to practice the precautionary principle. Europe has this principle they call the precautionary principle, that things are proven guilty until they're found innocent. Whereas in the United States, by and large, these chemicals that are released into the environment are not tested for safety before being released into the environment. And then it takes, an act of Congress to take them off the shelf or whatnot. So we're kind of guinea pigs in that sense. So it pays dividends to really be mindful of what you're putting in your mouth every day. You have a choice to eat organic food or not. I know it can be expensive. So one of the resources that I do mention is the Environmental Working Group. They do a fantastic job helping people to determine which foods should you absolutely not eat conventionally grown, like strawberries, which tend to be little sponges for chemicals. And so what you eat matters the most there, but what you put on your body matters a lot. And women are putting on like 125 chemicals on their bodies before they leave the bathroom, between the body care products, the makeup, and so forth. And men, maybe a little bit fewer, but still, a tremendous amount. So we can just make smarter decisions about what we're buying and what we're putting on us and in us, and that will go a huge way towards lowering that body burden that I talked about.
Well, it's really interesting. We can either, say it's too expensive when we look at organics and just go ahead and buy conventional and pay for it later, where we really get the big price, the big bill.
Absolutely. That makes so much sense. And I have heard it said that one of the best ways you can spend your money when you're looking at food is on making sure that you're buying organic meat. Because we're not just what we eat, we're whatever we eat ate. And in the context, I'll use the example of cows. I mean, cows are allergic to corn, but they're fed corn, they're stuffed with corn. How do you think that is going to manifest in our bodies when we consume that? And by the way, the corn that they're eating is genetically modified. And I think the jury may still be out on how, that's going to play out for all of us. But so I've also heard that chemicals can concentrate, like the antibiotics that the cows are fed to fatten them up. Mm-hmm. They tend to concentrate in the tissues. So you might be getting 3 times the pesticide and herbicide load when you're eating conventionally raised meat. So if you can prioritize eating the organic and wild meats, and of course wild fish.
Well, it's interesting, when I was in California, a lot of the farmers out there would use corn because it's a way to fatten up the cattle quickly, So when you look at that, and the cows are having a hard time with it, they're not really corn eaters. You don't see them going through fields eating all the corn they can. You look at this going, okay, there's something seriously wrong with this picture, and it makes perfect sense.
Right. Well, we have to be our own best advocate. We have to become the CEOs of our own health and well-being. And I know that can be difficult to fully grasp and embody, because for years we've relied on other people, and we may think that those packaged product companies have our best interests at heart. The cereals that I grew up in, General Mills and Kraft, and I'm not picking on anyone in particular. You understand that. I'm just saying that we need to be much more mindful, much more discerning about what we're putting in and on our bodies, because at the end of the day, nobody else is going to pay the bill, right? So I think it's a combination of becoming informed, educating ourselves, first of all, that you can reverse these autoimmune disorders. I call them conditions because they're conditional on how you live your life. They're not diseases that you are going to be stuck with forever. So it really pays to follow stories of people that have reversed these conditions, educate yourself, and know that you're empowered to do this too. It's just a matter of deciding that you're going to put your health and well-being above everything else.
Well, that's the really empowering thing about your book and your messaging, is that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Things can be reversed. You can make changes that impact your health in a positive way.
Absolutely. And it's really one meal at a time, one day at a time. You don't have to jump in and do all of this at once because it does sound like it can be overwhelming. But in writing this book, I wanted to be the health coach, which is what I am now. I got certified as a functional medicine health coach. I wanted to kind of take people by the hand on this journey, kind of like the book that I would have wanted when I was 19, to say, here's what you can do one step at a time. Let's start with food, and then let's examine our guts. And boy, if we're not, much better by doing those two things, well, then let's go to the next step, which might be maybe there's an infection in there. Lyme disease could be a whole other topic. But there are lots of infections like Epstein-Barr virus at the root of things. And what kind of toxins are you surrounding yourself with? And what is your load of stress? Not just present day, but childhood emotional trauma has been proven to correlate with the advent of autoimmune issues decades later. So this just puts the power back in our hands to know that this is something that you can take on. You can do it. Like my dad said, you can beat this thing. It's true. Hope is real. Healing is possible. I'm proof. And there are thousands of people who have reversed these seemingly incurable conditions. So that's the path that I'm on.
Well, there's a lot of hope out there, and people should pick up your copy of Beat Autoimmune. Even if you're not sure if it's something you have, this is a great book and great resource to pick up. Palmer, where can people connect with you and be part of your community?
Well, that is a great question. So for your audience, since we started with food, the best place to start is to examine the foods that you're eating. I've created a gift called Your Optimal Food Guide. If they go to palmer-kippola.com, so Palmer and then Kippola is spelled KIPPOLA.com/gift, they can download this optimal food guide that kind of takes them by the hand to examine the foods that they're eating and identify the optimal ones. They can look at my website at palmer-kippola.com for information, inspiration, and motivation. And I lead a private Facebook group called Transcend Autoimmune that people are welcome to check out. It is filled with community and interactivity and information and inspiration. So that would be where I would recommend people go.
Well, Palmer, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, thank you, Palmer. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you, and of course, to hear about your new book, Beat Autoimmune, The 6 Keys to Reverse Your Condition and Reclaim Your Health. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.